Hi everyone, welcome to Safe Summer Travel, everything you need to know about child passenger safety. My name is Lauren Paterno. I work in government and public affairs for AAA Northeast. Today we are going to talk about best practices for child passenger safety, common mistakes and misuse of car seats, and what the research says regarding why these practices and guidelines are so important at preventing child injury and death on our roadways. We have two great panelists with us who are really experts in the field. We have Mandy Summers, who is the coordinator for the Child Passenger Safety Program for the state of Massachusetts. She also has 20 years of experience working at Safe Kids in child passenger safety. She really is an expert and at everything and all knows everything with car seats. She also has children in high school now, but she remembers quite well the challenges of car seat installation from when her children were young. We also have Dr. Mark Zonfrillo, who is the pediatric emergency medicine physician. He's also an epidemiologist and associate professor of emergency medicine and pediatrics at Hasbro Children's Hospital and the Albert Medical School of Brown University. His research focuses on pediatric injuries with an emphasis on risk factors for motor vehicle occupant injuries, concussions, and disabling injuries for children. Thank you both for being here today. So before we begin, just a little housekeeping. Dr. Zonfrillo will speak first, and he's going to discuss what the research says about why these best practices are so important and some of the common misuses of car seats and seatbelts for children. Then I'm going to pass it over to Mandy, and she will share some of the nuts and bolts on how to keep your child safe in the car. And then at the end, we will have time for Q&A. And please, so if you have questions along the way, type them into the chat and we can address them at the end. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Zonfrillo.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this opportunity. Today, I'm just going to talk a little bit about child passenger safety and the experiences and a little bit about the data behind the reasoning for the current recommendations. Next slide. So each year, approximately 1,100 children die on the roads. Thankfully, that number has gone down over time. We're now, approaching 600 or 700 each year that die on the roads, but hundreds of thousands of children are injured. And the good news is, again, child passenger safety fatalities have decreased 46% since 2002, and that's been in part by a large efforts through the ease of injury prevention, so engineering, enforcement, education, and economics. And so we're designing car seats and cars to make them safer. We are educating individuals and much like this webinar, we're sharing some of the data behind some of these recommendations. And then the economics and enforcement really deals with the laws, the legislation, and enforcement of those laws and legislation by creating incentives and disincentives for safe behaviors. And we've come a really long way in terms of a lot of child passenger safety legislation in the United States. Next slide. We know that child safety seats can reduce fatalities by 71% for infants compared to seatbelts alone, and by 54% for toddlers. And this is really profound, because when you think of medical devices or other preventive measures, if you have a child safety seat and you're using it properly, reducing the risk of death is hugely impactful on the public health of children. And these injuries, almost all, are 100% preventable, and these fatalities in particular are 100% preventable. Next slide. When in the older children, we use a belt positioning booster seat, and the reason for that is because of the potential injuries to children in belts alone. What happens is you have seat belts that are really created for a 70-kilogram adult passenger, and they're not meant for children. And so what happens is, if children are in a belt without a belt positioning booster seat, The lap portion of the belt doesn't fit appropriately around the bony pelvis, and the shoulder portion of the belt doesn't fit appropriately around the sternum and the collarbone. And instead, the lap portion can ride up on the abdomen, and the shoulder portion can ride up on the neck. This results in injury in the event of a crash, where you have this kind of seatbelt syndrome, where you can have bruising in the abdomen, and you can have injuries to the internal organs of the abdomen, both the solid organs like the liver and spleen, and also the hollow organs like the intestine. You can also have this accompanied by injuries to the spine, because the spine flexes around the belt when it's improperly positioned. Although we have seen an increase in use of 5-point harnesses in children, we still have a ways to go. And it's also really important to remember that when they've outgrown the forward-facing harness, they need to be in a belt positioning booster seat to prevent these types of injuries and this cluster of injuries when using the belt alone. Next slide. And so again, this booster seat, what it does is it helps reposition the inherent belt in the vehicle in order to have it properly positioned on the child. Next slide. And we know that belt positioning booster seats lower the risk of injury to children ages 4 to 8 years by 45% compared with the use of seat belts alone. And so this is really important, and the reasoning behind these recommendations. Next slide. So this is kind of a busy slide, but one other thing I wanted to sort of discuss was the recommendation of having children seated in the rear of the vehicle versus the front seat. And basically, these data looked at death in rear versus front seat passengers for restrained and unrestrained passengers who were 0 to 12 years old. And basically, the bottom line here in the highlighted box is that you have a 38 to 47% reduction in death for rear versus front seated passengers ages 0 to 12 years old. And there are a few different reasons for that. The rear of the vehicle is just inherently safer for the child. And one of the reasons is that the airbag in the front seat, while it can be protective for an adult, can actually cause significant injury, particularly in a younger child. Now, thankfully, there are vehicle fleets that are evolving, and the front passenger airbag is automatically turned off if it's below a certain threshold of weight. That varies depending on the maker of the vehicle. But that being said, there are still older fleets of vehicles on the road, and there are other factors that lead to a higher risk of injury and as these data show, death when children are seated in the front of the vehicle versus the rear. So that's the basis of that recommendation. Next slide. So if you could just advance 3 clicks for the animation, but the basic principles of child passenger safety are to use a restraint on every trip, keep children under 13 years old in the rear vehicle, use the appropriate restraint for the child's age and size, and click again, and use the restraint correctly. And if you could click twice more. So by not using the restraint on every trip, obviously that's someone who's unrestrained. And if you could click one more time, but if you don't do the latter 3 and click again, this is inappropriate restraint, or also known as misuse. And so it's important to know that while it's wonderful that people have every intention of using a seat, child passenger, a child restraint device in the vehicle, there are many potential ways to misuse. Next slide. And so there are 3 categories of misuse. If you could click 3 times. One is restraint selection and placement in the vehicle. 2 is incorrect or loose child restraint system to the vehicle attachment. So that's actually attaching the seat to the vehicle itself. And 3 is incorrect or loose restraint of the child in the child restraint system. So that's basically the harness, both the harness selection, what slots you're using, and how tight the harness is, where the chest clip is, etc. Next slide. So I think that the things to remember are that when you want to choose the correct restraint for your child, and I know Mandy's going to be talking a little bit about the recommendations for that. But there are data to support this. There are data to both support which restraint to use, how long to use it, and where to place your child in the vehicle, and then also how to actually use that restraint to prevent misuse. And by taking these steps, you can optimize the safety of a child passenger in the vehicle, particularly in the event of a crash. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zonfrillo. I found the data particular about the difference between sitting a child in the front seat versus the back seat very interesting. Thinking about, when my son is older and he's begging to sit in the front seat, I'll think about that data and say, nope, sorry, you got to be in the back. Now I'm going to pass it over to Mandy. Mandy's going to give us kind of the nuts and bolts. Mandy has sat and, been in the side of many vehicles over the course of her career. She's probably stuck her hand into Cheerios, lollipops, all sorts of stuff, you name it, but we could talk about that another time. Mandy, thanks so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me and addressing this important topic. So I'm going to start with the car seat and booster seat recommendations and kind of the range of ages that NHTSA recommends. And this is also from the American Academy of Pediatrics. So you see, if you look at each stage, there is a range of ages within that stage. I'm not going to go over each stage, but I'm going to kind of highlight rear facing. Basically, anything within this parameter is safe, is considered safe. But within each range, for example, rear facing, there are levels of protection that are good, better, and best. So if we take rear facing, for example, we're always also looking at this range. We're also looking at what the laws are in the state and what the car seat manufacturers recommend. So for example, you see this, the recommendation is birth to rear facing. A good protection for children is to keep them rear facing up to the age of a year and 20 pounds. That's the minimum that you can do. But it's just considered good protection. If that's all you can do, they're still safe, but we encourage going farther. So if you were to get to the middle range, about 2 years old, that's considered better protection. You're keeping your kids rear facing longer. Rear facing takes the impact of the crash. It's highly, highly protective. Each stage within this chart gets a little less protective. So if we can keep the children even rear facing up to 3, even 4, up to the highest height and weight of the manufacturer's recommendations, that's when you're giving the best, what we call best practices, which what we encourage. So if you can stay rear facing as long as possible, a lot of the car seats go to 40, some 50 pounds rear facing. The longest you can do it, the best protection you're giving your child. So that within the safe range, there is good, better, and best protection. And again, we're always looking at state law and what the manufacturer allows. So there are some states that children have to stay rear facing until they're at least 2. Some of them are and 30 pounds, some of them are or 30 pounds, so you want to look at that. Also, what the car seat manufacturer allows. So some convertible car seats that can go rear facing and forward facing will not allow a child under 2 to face the front in their particular car seat. So that's things that those are things we're looking at within these recommendations. Next slide. Okay, so when we're looking at how a child, when we're looking at car seat use and we're looking at how the child comes in, if the car seat and installation is correct, we're looking at these different things. So we're, again, choosing the right seat. As was talked about before, we want to make sure that it's appropriate for the age, weight, and size of the child, and also their developmental levels. Is it facing the right way for that child's age, weight, and size? You know, is it rear facing when it should be, or is it forward facing when we look at that? The location in the vehicle. So not all seats in a vehicle will accommodate all car seat installations. So we're looking to see, you know, is there an airbag in that location? Does the seat of the car fit the car seat? Are there other things that might be, you know, does the seat belt work? Are there other things that might cause problems for that installation? And then we're looking at the way that the child is harnessed in the seat. Are the straps where they should be? And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Are they snug enough? Do they work? Do they need to be adjusted somehow? And then the installation itself. You know, is the car seat tight enough? We want to make sure it doesn't move more than an inch where it's attached to the vehicle. So is the car seat itself tight enough? Are the correct seat belt use, correct lower anchor use? So we're looking at all of this together when we're buckling kids in the car and seeing if there's any misuse or if it's correct. Next slide. So a few things that we use to help us do that are the car seat manufacturer's instructions. All the installation, all the requirements are laid out in their instructions. Labels actually, so if for some reason you don't have the instructions, you can look at the labels and they're pretty helpful. This particular slide shows, it's just pointing out that this is a convertible car seat and there are two different places where the seat belt goes, and it shows you according to the label where they go. But you can also kind of see on that slide that it shows you how to install the car seat with the different methods, the seat belt, if you only have a lap belt, the latch system, it all shows you. And it also gives you all the sizes, the age, and the weight on that label itself. Car seat manufacturers also have gotten really good with their websites, their YouTube channels. They have a lot of social media that can help installation. And I always recommend if you have any questions, go to the car seat manufacturer site first. Make sure that it is from the manufacturer, because they give the most up-to-date recommendations, and you know that you're getting the appropriate information. We also look at the vehicle owner's manual to make sure that we're in the right location, that we're using the right way to install the car seat. And there are also sometimes little things like you have to take the headrest off, or you have to have the seat back in a certain position. So those are things we look at too. Next slide. Okay, so for harnessing a child rear facing, you want to look at the labels of the car seat to make sure that you have the correct harness location. So for example, rear facing, you want to have the car seat harnesses at or below shoulder level. So you can kind of see in the picture that that's where those are located. You want to place a child's body all the way back in the car seat and place the harness retainer clip, which is the clip across the chest, right at armpit level. And then you want to tighten the harness for a snug fit. The next slide will actually show you a video of what I mean by snug fit. We use what we call a pinch test, and it's really hard to explain, but this video is good because it shows you actually. So hopefully it works. Oh, darn. Okay. Oh, it doesn't work. Okay. Well, if we go back to the slide, you can actually see in the picture. So when we're looking at the pinch test for harnessing, you can see that what they're doing is pinching, actually grabbing some of the harness, and that means that it's too loose. So we would ask you to tighten the harnesses up a little bit, and then when they're tight enough, your fingers can't actually grab any of the webbing. It's something that when we are working with families in car seats, we can visually show. It's a little harder to talk about, but you will notice the difference. You'll notice that when your harnesses are loose, you can actually grab a little bit of the webbing, and when they're tight, your fingers will just sort of slide off the webbing. Of course, we don't want it too snug. You don't want it to indent, no indentations. We just want to make sure that the harnesses are tight enough that the child will stay in place when the car seat does its work during a crash. Okay, next slide. Okay, so for forward-facing harnessing, it's basically the same. There's one difference is that the harnesses come out of the car seat at or above the shoulder level of the child. So that's a different than rear-facing. Rear-facing, they're at or below because they kind of keep the child in the car seat, pushed down a little bit. At or above, they're kind of moving forward with the crash, so we want them above the shoulder. So between the shoulder and the ears are the best part, best place. You place again the harness retainer clip at armpit level, and you make it tight using that pinch test again. And keeping kids in harnesses forward facing as long as possible. As we talked about, each stage gets a little less protective. So when you move to a booster seat, they're basically using a seat belt as an adult would, and it doesn't offer quite as much protection as the harnesses do. So many of the harnesses on car seats will go up to 65, 70 pounds. They have quite a height range too, so you can get a child to be a pretty good age with the harnesses. Next slide. So when do you want to move to a booster seat? So we're looking at moving a child to a booster seat when they've outgrown the height or weight limits of a harnessed car seat. Some booster seats will actually have a age range on them. The lower age range will be 4. So we want to make sure that they meet that age range. A lot of the weights are now 40 pounds. Some of them are 30 pounds minimum to move to a booster seat. Also, we want to make sure that the booster seat actually positions the seat belt where it should be. Not all booster seats fit all kids the same way, so that's actually something that you really need to look at. You know, you may have a booster seat from a friend, but it actually makes the seat belt go up over the belly of the child instead of on the hip. So that's something that we're going to look at for booster seats. We want to make sure also that the child's mature enough to sit in that position for the entire ride. So what we're doing when we put a child in a car seat or a booster seat is make sure that they're properly positioned so that all the protective factors work so that it minimizes injury. So if a child is in a booster seat but can't sit still, is leaning over or leaning forward, then that seat belt's not going to protect them the way they should be. So if that's the case, then we would keep them in the harnessed car seat. Next slide. Okay, so then the recommendations for seat belts are about the same. Usually, in general, it's about 4'9", which is in general about a 10-year-old. But we also look at these different factors because, again, kids are all built differently. Some kids are able to sit in seat belts, you know, at 4'9". Some of them, the seat belts just don't work. So we make sure that their back is against the vehicle seat without slouching. They can bend their knees over the edge of the seat. Keep their feet flat on the floor so that they're not, you know, if they can't put their feet on the floor, then they tend to slouch a little bit more. Have the lap belt snugly on the upper thighs and not the stomach. So we want them on the hard parts of the body to prevent any injuries, not on the soft tissue. And have the shoulder belt lie snug across the shoulder and chest and not on the neck or the face, because if it hits them in the neck or hits them in the face, then they're going to want to put the seat belt behind them, and then they have basically no upper body protection. So those are some of the things that we look for seat belts. And next slide. I just wanted to give some resources. We always recommend, if at all possible, to, you know, especially if you've never installed a car seat before and you're trying to install a car seat for your child, to reach out to a child passenger safety technician. And they're listed on the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration website. They're also on Safe Kids Worldwide, and the National Child Passenger Safety Board has some listings also. So these are some good references. They have the video of the pinch test that I was hoping to show you is on the Safe Kids Worldwide website also. You can take a look at that. And then the American Academy of Pediatrics has recommendations. That's the one down at the bottom. They have recommendations, not recommendations, but their listing of all the car seats that are available. Because unfortunately, we have been finding there are counterfeit car seats. So it is good to have a list of actual car seats that are available. It's not to say that the manufacturers aren't coming out with new car seats all the time, but it can help you pinpoint whether or not a car seat is legitimate if something seems not right. So that's all I have for today. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. And it reminds me that I have to move up my son's chest clip because it is too tight on him. All right, so I have a few questions that came in, and this first one is for Dr. Zonfrillo, and it's a two-part question. The first part question is, what does the research say about keeping children rear-facing as long as possible? Why is that the recommendation? What does the research show us? And also, is there any updated research in respect to the effectiveness of new state laws requiring children to be rear-facing under 2 years old?
Those are great questions. Thank you so much. So there's a wealth of research demonstrating the benefit of keeping children rear-facing as long as possible. A lot of it has come out of the experience in Sweden in particular, where they actually keep their children rear-facing up to the age of 4 years. Now, they do have car seats that accommodate that and attachments to the vehicle that accommodate that. The North American or US market of car seats and vehicle fleets would not accommodate that. But they, they're basically the safest country in the world when it comes to child passenger safety. In the past 10 to 15 years, they've had single-digit to 0 deaths in children under the age of 16. And so what it shows is that you and the reason for that, by the way, is because most crashes are forward crashes and kind of forward-facing crashes, or frontal crashes is the word I'm trying to say. And with the frontal crash, because that's the most common type of crash, if you have a child rear-facing in the rear of the vehicle, all those forces are going to be distributed, along the back of their head and their spine, as opposed to if they were forward-facing, all of those structures would of course lurch forward. And so that's the reasoning behind that. And as far as the updated data since the recommendations have changed, we don't really have as many updated statistics since in crashes, because the state laws, although the recommendations initially came out in 2011 from the American Academy of Pediatrics with their policy statement and technical report, and those were affirmed and updated in 2018. The laws, as always, take a few years to come into play, and with that comes necessary time to acquire a critical mass of data to look at current rates of injury, particularly comparing laws, states with those laws and without. That being said, it's definitely ripe for that, and it's important to remember that it's critical that we continuously do look at the data, because not only are the laws changing, but everything else is changing. Children, unfortunately, are becoming a little bigger in the U.S. We have an obesity epidemic. Car seats are changing. Mandy discussed that. The car seat fleet is changing, and certainly the vehicle fleet is changing. With very, very different vehicles on the road, even 5 years ago, 10, 15, 20 years ago than we do now. And so, definitely look out for more updated statistics, particularly comparing states with laws for rear-facing versus not.
Thank you. I didn't know that about Sweden. That's very interesting. Mandy, going off what Dr. Zonfrillo said about the research, and I've experienced this myself, how, I kept my son rear-facing until he was about 3.5. He's on the smaller side. And I would have friends saying, "Why is your kid still rear-facing?" And they kind of would look at me like I was an alien. How do we kind of change that? And these are parents who are very well educated, they know, but it's just not the norm out there. I feel like what can we do to encourage parents and kind of make rear-facing as long as possible the norm?
Right. Well, definitely the recommendation by the American Academy of Pediatrics has helped. I think just encouraging, at the doctor's offices, having the doctors encourage rear facing as long as possible. Just every time, the messaging, definitely rear facing. There are videos that show, show differences between rear facing and forward facing. And if that's something, you see it, the forward facing, even correct installation forward facing, there's a lot of movement in that within the child. There's a lot of head excursion is what they call it, the head and neck go forward a lot. It's really, even though it's considered a correct installation, there's a lot that goes on. And the older that we can get kids before they turn forward facing, the more protected they are, the stronger they are to be able to handle those forces. So I think just encouragement from everybody, social media, when the doctor's offices, if they see a car seat technician, I think all of those things will help.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, anytime we make a decision or a behavior change, we're influenced by a lot of different factors, right? We're influenced by our own underlying knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs about something, but we're also influenced by people around us. So certainly, your pediatrician, if you trust your pediatrician, social media, if you're seeing or hearing things on social media, you want to make sure that there's correct information and not misinformation. But also peers, and you have to get creative with communities. There was a really interesting study done a while ago now, and it was looking at adult passenger safety. And what they did was they tried to see if having a pastor in a parish give messaging at the end of the service that, by the way, wear your seatbelt. Be safe, if that increased seatbelt use. And they found that it did, and it sustained the behavior. So having people, in individual or communities circles who are influencers, people who they respect, can be very, very powerful. We have marketing and advertising campaigns all the time. We see it on social media, we see it on the internet, we see it on TV, trying to sell us stuff. So we have to be in the business of selling safety. Definitely.
And can I just, one thing that I think, one reason that I hear a lot that people turn their kids around early is the legs. They're worried about the legs. The legs are up against the back of the seat of their child. They look uncomfortable. And what we're finding is that, well, first of all, kids are a lot more flexible, and they're actually not that uncomfortable. As long as they're within the range, the age, weight, and height range of the rear-facing car seat, it's okay if their legs are, up the back of the seat of the car, hanging over. The statistics for crashes are bearing out. The kids are not suffering leg injuries. They're not getting. That's not a problem in a crash, because the way that the car seat works, it goes back, they kind of get the legs come forward. They're not suffering the injuries that a lot of people think that they would happen. And they're not bracing their legs against the seat of the car either, because they don't really know. They're not like seeing what's going on, so they're not having problems with that. But that is definitely right. One of the things I think that most people want to turn their kids around.
Yeah, and in addition, it's not only that we're not seeing, an increase in extremity injuries, but even if we were, I would take an extremity injury any day over a head or spine injury. But the fact is, we're not even seeing an increase. The other sort of reason I hear is, well, I can't see my child. I'm not interacting with them. I'm worried about sort of stunting their social, development. My answer to that is, I don't know how long you're spending in the car, but I think it's going to be fine if you're on a ride and they're rear facing, because it's important for their safety.
I finally turned my child around when we wanted to go see Christmas decorations, and he couldn't see the Christmas decorations. So finally, at a 3.5, 3 1/4, I was like, okay, you're big enough. I feel like you can do it. But I mean, you raised a good point that they do, and I felt like for myself, and I'm sure other parents out there too, feel like there's this balance between the safety and then children kind of throwing a tantrum. I know I had actually contacted a technician being like, what should I do? He does want to see more because he is more developmentally ready to be forward facing, but and it's a balancing act, I think. And you know, and you know, it's a tough call sometimes.
It definitely is. And I'll say my son, at the time when my older son was little, it was 2 years old. That was the recommendation. And it was a battle every day to get him, he did the board, and I had to try to get him to, you know, push down in the seat, and it was a battle every day. I know it's not easy, but there are definitely, you know, I mean, I think soft toys are a good thing to have, you know, nothing really hard, but like if you have soft books or, you know, that they can look at, or things like that might help. I totally understand the battle.
Yeah, I do as well. I have two daughters, they're 9 and 11, and you know, I went through the whole thing of child passenger safety. I think that you know, I have a few answers to that, or a few responses to that. The first is, you know, things like broccoli, if you're going to eat their vegetables or not, that can sometimes be negotiable, but safety is non-negotiable. And I think they can become challenging if exceptions are made, or if you have different caregivers and there's inconsistency. And then the other thing too is, as kids get older, you know, they see that their friends are quote unquote graduating to the next step, even if it's prematurely, and they say, well, I don't want to be in a baby seat, or I don't want to be in the back seat. But just kind of reinforcing that safety. At the end of the day, though, you just have to do the best that you can. And, you know, there's always going to be circumstances like, you know, if you have 4 kids and they're all under the age of 8, you know, okay, yeah, one of them has to sit in the front seat, and then you put the seat as far back as you can. You make sure the airbag is turned off. So you have to do the best you can.
That actually leads to my next question. You know, I have 2 children. It's easy for me to decide who goes where. What do you do when you have 3 children, 4 children in either booster seats, car seats, rear facing, forward facing, and then also, you know, you're in a sedan. What do you do if you're in a sedan? What if you can't afford the minivan or the SUV, which makes it a little bit easier? And how do you make the choice of who goes where?
Right. It's definitely, that's something, it's on an individual level. I mean, we always encourage best practice, but we also know that the real world comes into play. So again, there's the range of safety. So, you know, we like the doctor said, we might have to put somebody in the front seat and make sure, you know, we put the seat back all the way. But we're looking at each individual child at that point and the scenario in the car, because not all the car seats will even fit. You know, you may have to get one specific car seat that will fit 3 across. That's definitely where a lot of the real world challenges come in, that we have to, which is a good thing to see a car seat technician who can help you figure that all out, because that's not an easy answer for sure.
All right, one other question, and Dr. Zanfrillo, you mentioned the risks associated with front seat versus back seat earlier, and we had a question come in regarding recent IIHS research that was done that showed that front seats are getting safer than rear seats in newer vehicles. Is there any thoughts on moving kids under 13 to front seats? You know, what is the research out there, and are you seeing this as well with the new vehicles?
Right, yeah, I mean, this is the exact reason why I said earlier that it's important to continuously reassess. You know, the assessments that we have, the data that we have from 20, 30 years ago is in many ways obsolete. And so I think it's great that folks like IIHS and others are showing, you know, newer data. To that particular study, I don't think that we're going to sort of, you know, the pendulum's going to swing the other way, and we're going to all of a sudden say, you know, put your kid in the front seat. But I think it's important, again, to kind of know the risk profile, if you will, of your vehicle. You know, if you have a 25-year-old vehicle that might not have an airbag sensor in the front seat, and it might not automatically turn off, and you know, you're in a situation where you have like multiple kids and one of the kids has to be in the front seat, it's important to know that, you know, and to sort of do what you can, again, to do the best that you can. So I think it's just continuing continuous awareness. I think one of the other things that's coming up on the horizon, not too distant future, is autonomous vehicles, and what's going to be the implication of child passenger safety in autonomous vehicles. they're going to be start to look differently. Maybe crash profiles will be different. Maybe, with all this active and passive safety measures, maybe, the crash risk will be drastically reduced. So that means we don't restrain our kids so there's a lot of questions that are going to be coming up as technology evolves for both the vehicles, the vehicle fleets, and the seats themselves.
And Safe Kids Worldwide actually has there is a work group on automated vehicle and remembering that children are going to be riding in these. So they're trying to proactively have the conversation about what's going to happen with kids and car seat safety in those vehicles.
Going back to the multiple children in the vehicles for one moment. So if you do have 3 children and you have a third row, what is the best recommendation? Do you put the oldest child in the third row? Do you leave, what is the going suggestion? If Mandy, if a minivan pulls up and they have 3 children in car seats, do you put the child, or 2 car seats, 1 booster, do you put the child in the booster in the third row? What's like logistically the best approach?
Again, there's no real easy answer on that, not like one blanket answer. We would definitely take a look and see what the situation with the car seats are. In general, it probably will be one of the older kids that will sit in the third row just because they can get themselves in and out a little bit easier. Some of the things that I might also be looking at are, who has a harnessed car seat in that car, and is there a tether anchor for a forward-facing seat in that third row? Different things like that, where, which seat moves so that the kids can get back there. There's unfortunately no one blanket answer for that one, but most likely it would be the oldest child would be in the back seat. It just depends on the car seats and how they fit and the kids themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Speaking of the, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I was just going to add to that, regardless of whether you have a third row or not, I think Mandy's point that, it's how that seat, how that child fits in that seat and how that seat fits in that vehicle. And there are an infinite number of combinations. I know when my 11-year-old was born, I was like, oh, I want to put her in the back seat of this SUV we had in the center. But the seat that we had in that particular vehicle, it just wasn't a tight fit. So I had to put her, on the side, and I ended up using the latches attachment, and that was the tighter fit. And so it was the combination of that seat and vehicle that I had to experiment a little bit and see, what was going to be the best fit for that combo.
Right, definitely. And so people ask, like, what's the best car seat? And, think that we're going to say, oh, it's the most expensive one. And that's not the case at all. It's the one that fits your vehicle, fits your child, and you'll use it correctly every time. That could be the $50 car seat. That could be the $300 car seat. It all depends on your vehicle and your child and the way they fit in the car exactly. So definitely, there's not one brand that's the best. There's not one car seat that's the best. It's all individual.
All right, and Mandy, you had mentioned the tether system before. We had a question come in. Do you feel, and Dr. Zanfrillo, feel free if you have any information on this as well, do you feel that parents understand the importance of the tether use? And either of you, have you seen any benefit in terms of limiting head and neck injuries with the use of the tethering system?
Well, I can say that definitely tether non-use and misuse is very high. So people are either, they don't really know when they get the car seat, they don't know what the tether does or how to use it. So we do see in forward-facing installations many times when people come to those, come with us with those, that they're not using it. The use is very low. I'm sure Dr. Zanfrillo, you maybe have more information about benefits, seeing the benefits of a tether, and injuries and.
Yeah, so they've actually the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety also did a study on this, as of others, and one of the studies they looked at forward-facing parents with children using forward-facing child restraints, and only 56% of them in this one study had the tether installed. And what was interesting was that almost 3/4 of those who were using the latch as the attachment for the seat to the vehicle used the tether. And it's probably because it was on the brain, you know, you're using the latch, okay, I'm gonna use the tether. But only 1/3 of those who installed with the seatbelt use the tether. And so it's critical, the tether is very, very, very important. And the most common reasons for non-use of the tether was that they didn't know was there, or they didn't know how to use it. And so I think it's really important to keep in mind that non-use of the tether, or misuse of the tether, but more frequently non-use of the tether, absolutely can increase your chance of an injury in a crash. And the other thing to remember is that misuse of car seats often doesn't happen with one particular type of misuse. It's often paired with something else. So if you're not using the tether, you may also not be using the car seat in some other way that's 100% appropriate. And so that combination of those misuses can either even further increase your risk of injury in a crash. So the tether is very critical, and we can definitely need to promote its higher use.
Definitely, yeah, that's probably one of the biggest misuses that we see. And we know they tell us that it prevents the head from moving forward an extra 4 to 6 inches, which, you know, is a huge amount of lifted off the strain off the neck for the child.
I just want to take a moment and discuss grandparents, because we often know that grandparents are primary caregivers sometimes, or assist with pickups and putting children, they're sometimes responsible for putting children in and out of car seats. And those buckles are very hard to manipulate. They're hard to manipulate for me. And I'm thinking about my own mother, who is RA, you know, trying to manipulate those buckles. What can I do, and others out there do, to support grandparents just from the logistics of like putting the child in, and even just lifting the child out, buckling and fastening them?
That is a struggle, and there is a certain amount of pressure that needs to be put on the buckles and that's a requirement of the car seat manufacturer. So if it's too light, like we have had people wanting to put WD-40 or something in the buckle to make it easier. That if it's too easy to do, then the kids can do that and they can come loose. So definitely that's not one of the things that I'm going to recommend. Don't do that. Oftentimes, so again, we say, best practice, and ideally you want to be able to put the car seat in the middle of the back seat, but oftentimes that's really difficult for people to lift, you know, especially as a carrier, lift the child into the middle of the back seat. So we will move the car seat to the side if that's, you know, if that's a good installation and that's something that's easier. As kids get older, sometimes they can buckle themselves in, and then the grandparent can just check to make sure everything's tight and no twists and all that. That can help. But it is definitely something that can be challenging for sure.
Yeah, and there's actually some data to support this. One study out of Indiana showed that when compared to driving with their parents, child passengers, when they drive with their grandparents, are more likely to have harnesses that are looser, and then the either belt or lower anchor attachments that are looser. And that could be a combination of, you know, mechanical difficulties, but also, you know, knowledge of, you know, how tight it needs to be. Thankfully, there was one other study that looked at the risk of injury and crashes of grandparents, and found that kids in general are a little bit safer when driving with grandparents, probably because they're driving a little bit more slowly. But that being said, we do still want to obviously optimize their restraint use and proper use and every trip.
Seen like these like devices that help buckle and unbuckle. Is that something that is recommended, or is that something that should be stayed away from?
I haven't seen a lot of literature on those. I have seen some of the devices at conferences. So I think if it's helping to unbuckle and buckle, but not doing any damage to the car seat, or not something that is attached to the car seat that the car seat manufacturer, they don't want you to add extra things to their car seats that they haven't tested them with, then it might be okay. I would definitely, check it out with the car seat manufacturer. You're certainly able to call. They have car seat technicians on their staff, and they're able to answer questions like that. I know from years of doing car seat installations, my thumbs are not as strong as they used to be from pushing all those buckles. So sometimes things like that sound like a great idea to me too.
All right, so another question about summer travel in terms of RVs. So Dr. Zonfrillo, do you know if there is any research about safety and children traveling in RVs? Is there any research that shows, injuries, deaths, positioning of how to, best practices, anything out there on children in RVs?
Yeah, unfortunately, there is not a lot of data on child passengers in RVs, and I think that I actually don't know a lot about the safety options in RVs. I know that some are equipped with belts, of course, and so if you have maybe even a lap belt, that could, again, it's better than nothing, so do the best you can. Without a proper lap and shoulder belt or latch lower anchors or a tether anchor, it's very difficult to install some of these car seats. I think that trying to do the best you can is probably the safest thing to do. You certainly don't want a young child to be unrestrained in a moving vehicle at all. And so you need to really think about that when considering taking a young child in an RV. And so if there aren't mechanisms by which to properly restrain them, it's quite unsafe. So again, it's very situational dependent, depending on the RV and depending on the age of the child. But I would say the younger the child, I would discourage people from traveling in RVs if they can't do it safely.
Right. I have actually seen some crash footage of RVs, and the living portion of the RV doesn't hold up as well as the cab of they're not subject to the same construction as actually the cab of the vehicle. So if you're unable to get the child into the cab, and most of those seats in the living part of the RV are side facing also, so we want make sure that they're front facing. I would say, like Dr. Zonfrillo said, I wouldn't put young kids especially. I would say don't travel in the living part of the RV. It looked pretty bad, the crashes that the footage that I saw.
Thank you, that's helpful. All right, so we have about 5 minutes left. Mandy, if there's just a takeaway you have for parents who are listening today, what would you say is the most important thing that they should walk away from today with?
I would say definitely try to keep your child in each stage as long as you possibly can. Each stage, as they move up through the stages of car seats, get a little less protective. So rear facing, as I said before, is the most protective. So keep them in the stage as long as you possibly can. Read the manufacturer's labels and the instructions, the vehicle, and that will help guide you on correct installation for your car seat. And then see if hopefully things will start to move in person, and you can check with a car seat technician. And many of us actually do virtual appointments. So if you are ever interested in having your car seat checked, but there's nothing in person available, I'm available. Those websites that I gave you have lists of people who will do virtual checks for you.
Thank you.
And there's a national one. Sorry, there's a national one coming up June 12th, actually.
Oh, good to know. Thank you. All right, and Dr. Sonfrillo, similar to you, if there was a data point that you would want to resonate in parents' minds, what would that data point be that you think is most important for them to remember?
Well, personally, I think it's, I would have to choose two. One is that use of a belt positioning booster seat reduces the risk of injury by more than 45% compared to seat belt alone. And then having a child sit in the rear of the vehicle reduces the risk of death compared to the front of the vehicle. Although, as we mentioned, with evolving technology, we need to reassess all of these. And so I would just say, follow the recommendations and do the best you can.
All right, well, I want to thank our panelists for being here today, and I want to thank our viewers. And again, if you think that after hearing today's webinar that you would like some help or assistance installing or fitting your child in the car seat, you have AAA's contact information. We can put you in touch with the right experts to get your car seat fitted safely. And everybody, buckle up, buckle your children up safely, and have a nice day. Thank you so much for joining us today.